And here we go. Hey, folks, I'm today with Chris Catania or Catania. You mentioned that's Catania from lasagna, right? The Italian pronunciation.
That's right. Yeah, it rhymes with lasagna. Catania
Perfect.
lasagna.
He's the owner and author and strategist of Community First Company Services. Chris, thank you so much for your time and for being the show. It's a pleasure to meet you and to have this conversation with you today.
Thank you, Alex. Excited to be here.
Well, it's very interesting. I was looking through your bio and everything that you've been doing. First, what's community first? And how did you start with it? Like, take us back to this specific moment you first saw the real potential of community first and explain what does it do?
The origin story for me goes back to way back when I was a music journalist and I had a moment at a concert. So I'm a huge music fan and still am. And I was there, and I had a connection. I was dealing with some things when I was at that age, and the live music experience helped me to feel this strong sense of belonging, right? And I felt the connection with the concert fans, and then I started a community out of that, and began to kind of get the feeling of what it meant to bring people together, to have a sense of belonging, to have a sense of connection on a shared topic, a shared experience, right? Certain emotional level. Because that concert experience, it made me feel, that I wasn't alone. It made me feel, that there were people there that I could talk to and everything like that. So I had that, and I started this community, and then from there, I had another aha moment, and it came when I was working at a advertising agency, and I began to see that community could be really powerful for brands, for
Right.
businesses, and the ability for companies and leaders to understand that when you are intentional about bringing people together around, a particular topic or particular product, or even internally around culture, right? That like that is a very powerful thing. So I began to help leaders understand that,
Right.
and I wanted to be able to guide companies and organizations in a way that transformed them, because I had that transformational experience on an individual level, and then I had this amazing experience, with in the concert experience. But then I understood on a broader scale that if companies were able to and leaders were able to infuse that sense of belonging into their product experience, into what that brand meant to them, or what that culture and that company meant to that individual and um, that employee or that customer. Like that's a powerful thing. And then from there, I began to understand, because there's a certain mindset that a leader has to have in order to do that. Because thinking community first, like it's not a common thing.
Right.
Leaders are under pressure. There's a sense of like wanting to have control over things, wanting to control the message, wanting to control everything from the top down, and I get that. Like that's kind of what we've all been taught, how to run a business, so to speak, and some of that behavior is still relevant. So community first is kind of opposite of that in a way where you get to open it up. So I saw leaders as I began to show them, if we launch these communities and if you tap into community in the context of your business, like you have a powerful connection with your customers and with your employees that your competitors don't, and you have a way to do that. So in a nutshell, over the last 20 years, seeing that and seeing the potential of it, that's why I'm excited to help companies do more of that, because we need more of that in our world and in the market.
Interesting. So it's been 20 years plus around, right? Like that
Hmm.
that you've been doing it. What was your first channel? Like what did you use to build this community, right? I'm not sure if Facebook was around that time already. Like sorry, I'm I'm completely bad
Not yet, not
at
yet.
dates.
No, it was close. It
So
was
how
close.
did you manage it? Like because you okay, I have a list of people, right? But how to make this work as a community now?
Yeah, so I was kind of doing two things earlier in my career, because it wasn't really popular to have brand communities at the time. Like early, this is like early 2000s, right? This is like 2004, 2003, or so, around that time period. So we're going we're going back some years here. If
Okay.
we can remember when the internet first started, so that's kind of like what we're talking about.
That's
right?
cool.
So it's like it's hard to remember a time when that existed, right? When we didn't have the
Uh,
internet. But what I figured out is that you could use. I used a combination. I used social media. I used online forums. I used events. I used content. I love storytelling. I have a background in writing, and I was going to be a music journal. I was going to be a journalist, and then this thing called the internet happened, and I had to figure out how do I pivot from journalism into that. So I pivoted into community building, into community first leadership and that. So I used online forums, social media. I used YouTube. I used blogging. I launched a podcast, to share and to share stories like we're doing here. So I used everything because I wanted to experiment because I knew that these tools were going to be important in the context of business in a short amount of time. So I wanted to get good at that, and that was one of my goals, to be able to connect community with these tools so that I could help companies, I could help leaders like navigate all these strange
cool.
tools.
I mean, you diversified as much as you could. It's been more than 20 years doing that, right? Why this still drives you today? And like, what's that? Because what's about community first leadership that after 20 years makes you to still believe that is genuine and makes a good transformation for leaders rather than just another framework or buzzword, for example?
Yeah, you would think after 20 years that community would be like a no-brainer, right? You would think it would be, yeah, let's build our company, and culture around community. You would think that that would be something that would be funded, that would be prioritized, that would be just yeah, of course we're going to do this. But that's not the case. Unfortunately, over the last 20, majority of leaders and majority of companies see community as a soft tool, right? Something that you can't measure. We don't know if it's going to work or not. And if we put ourselves out there, people might say bad things. And what do we do
Right.
if people say bad things? Well, that can come later in our conversation, but over the last 20 years, I've dealt with all these different myths that leaders have. That community is not measurable. You can't connect it to business value. You can't show ROI, all these different things, right? Or community is whatever, so on and so forth, right? So over the last 20 years, you know, there have been some groundbreaking companies using community to show that, yes, in fact, you can turn a company around. You can turn a multi-million dollar company around, industry leader company around, to using community to drive revenue, to reduce costs. You can do all these things. You can use it to transform the market and the world in that way. So even though all that happened, like the reason I do it today is because we still don't have majority of companies, majority of leaders thinking like this. And
You're
we couldn't
what?
like we we couldn't be in a more important time, because when you look at the studies, right, you look at, there's a well documented loneliness epidemic, right, that's been happening since 2017, 2019. That's fact, right? Unfortunately, with all this technology, with all these things and ways for us to connect as human beings and as businesses and everything, we are still lonely, majority of people. So if you think about that's the idea of that, is that, well, that loneliness epidemic is in fact impacting customers at a personal level, and staff, right, and employees. So it's really in its best interest for business owners to do that. And yeah, I just think that there is still an opportunity to guide leaders and to show that that the the world needs more community led leaders leading community first companies.
Right? Like you still have a mission to fulfill and to complete. And that's a beautiful thing. That's your main feel, like what makes you to keep moving. And you mentioned about the traditional leaders, right? For companies. Let's dive into something now, which would be like very interesting. I would like your explanation on that. What's the difference between community first leaders and traditional leadership? The default leadership model is like most organizations, still the top down, like
Hmm.
visionary at the top, everyone else executing. You are arguing for something fundamentally different, apparently. And what's the single most dangerous thing about traditional hierarchical leadership that nobody in the boardroom wants to admit out loud? and you noticed that in your experience?
Yeah, it comes down to one word, trust.
Okay.
Because if you don't think community first, it's hard to build trust. Like if you don't have a community and you don't have relationships, because relationships make up community. And how do you have a relationship with trust, right? So I like to see community as it's infrastructure. It's that pipeline, and it's the connective tissue that you need to run a company, to run a business. So when you think about traditional leadership in that sense, comes down to a couple things. It's like, there's the idea of fixed mindset versus growth mindset. There's been a lot of studies and a lot of good books written about that, and I think that the old way obviously is a fixed mindset. That things have to be this way, or we don't do this way, we're doing it the wrong way, and there's no my way or the highway, kind of thing, and top down. Really, it's the mindset that drove the industrial revolution, where businesses used to see humans as cogs, as widget makers, with that. And that probably got us good through the first part of the first 19th, 18th century. But we're far beyond that, right? And I don't know if that was ever the right way to do it in the beginning, but here we are in 2026, and we need people are lonely. Businesses are people say they're disconnected and they don't trust. If you look at the research, customers say they don't trust corporations, they don't trust businesses, and staff doesn't trust leaders. Again, there's an issue to address there. But the other side of the fixed mindset is the growth mindset. And growth mindset says, hey, I want feedback, I want to get better. And when you have a community, like, you're open to, how's that person think, how's that person feel, what I did, or what we're developing with products, what do you actually like, what do you don't like, like, open communication going back and forth. So the evolution, community first leadership, that's what I'm passionate about. I believe it's the evolution of servant leadership, which has been around for decades, right? In that way. But what's exciting about what we have now is that I believe community led leadership is the evolution of servant leadership, because you can now scale the community led leadership with networks. And it's this idea of moving from just a team organizational mindset to a more ecosystems. That we are a society, and we are a marketplace that is connected, that is interdependent, right? And it's important for leaders to understand that. And that's what community first leaders do. They understand that they're just not operating in a silo anymore. That they are dependent on relationships, and those relationships are dependent on relationships and relationships, and we're all connected, through the human experience. And then that human experience is part of the business experience. Because if you don't have, humans, you're hard to have a business in that
True.
sense, right? You need customers. Customers are humans, right? So it's this idea of, fixed mindset versus growth mindset, and then you take the growth mindset further, and you have community led growth mindset, where you're actively, intentionally asking for feedback, and and you don't shy away from, opening up to hear what people have to say about an experience, a product, a policy, or all these different things, right? That you actually embrace the feedback, and you don't shy away from it, and that's the idea, kind of in a nutshell. And I think it's a fantastic opportunity, because people want authenticity today. And we're going to get into, it sounds like, some of the AI stuff, but I think the AI era that we're in now really positions leaders to take advantage of people wanting authenticity, and they want trust. Where sometimes you're interacting with the AI tools and the AI experiences, and they're not very authentic, and we're all wonder, like, is this real? So that's, one way to look at it. There's opportunity for authenticity, and that's what community led leadership is about. So it's it is very exciting in that.
Just one thing on the community first, right? How would it work in terms of implementation? Let's say if I have a business, 50 people right now, and I'm facing problems with my leadership structure, how would you come and support my business? Like, because I'm facing issues with my staff, and how would you come along and work with me and implement community first?
Yeah, first when I work with leaders, I usually do this diagnostic tool
Okay.
experience where we kind of see where you're at. You know where you're at the mindset, because all of this is dependent on the mindset. Because you can't just buy a community platform. You can't just get the technology and put it out there, right? Like I've seen leaders do that. They get shiny tool syndrome,
Mhm.
and they're like, "We just launched this community. It's all going to work. It's like the field of dreams. You build it, they're going to come, and everything's going to be great." Well, maybe, but usually it doesn't work out like that. The way that we like to work, and the most effective way, is that you start with the mind, kind of do a diagnostic of where that leadership is in the perception of community. Where are they at? Are they curious? Are they more skeptical? Because depending on where you're at, then we work with examples and kind of figure that out. So it starts in the mind, and then there's a conversation about, like, what are the biggest pain points and opportunities in the business, because you can start community in a lot of different ways in your business. You can use it for culture internally, and you can use it for product feedback. You can use it to enhance sales as early warning signals and customer relationships. You can use it to for support, to deflect things. So you don't want to. When I work with leaders in their companies, we try not to boil the whole ocean at the same time, right? We try to, like,
Right.
figure out what do you need. So we walk them through a process, of figuring out, let's start someplace. Let's align, both internally, and get all the leadership staff aligned. Because the other reality is that there's a lot of leaders, and not everybody's going to be on the same page, right? There's somebody
Sure.
like, oh, because this community thing is kind of like whatever. You might get one leader out of five or one leader out of eight that are like, this is the right thing to do. And everybody else is like, whatever. I don't, it's a waste of time. They're just going to talk about cat pictures, and it's going to be like Reddit, or it's just going to be completely useless. So you have to align, and everybody has to go, okay, this is where we're going to use it to drive this particular business goal. Because that's the other thing that leaders may not really think about when they think about community, is taking the specific community and aligning it to the business goal. Are we going to use this to drive growth, reduce costs, better products? Start somewhere. Don't start with everything. Start somewhere. Show success, show ROI, show value, and then grow over time. Because we're talking, I always explain this to companies too, is that this is a multi-year experience. Like, this
Okay.
is, it's not microwave. Like, you can't microwave community. It's like a fine meal. Like, it takes time over. So that's what those conversations look like. First, this diagnosis. We do a diagnostic of kind of figuring out where we're at, and then we figure out the best place to go and kind of plot your course. Up the mountain or along the marathon or all that kind of stuff. And it's a gradual process, right?
That's cool. Chris, you wrote a book, right? Community First Advantage.
I did, yes, yeah.
Have you in your hand now? Can you show us? It's with you right now.
The
You
book,
have an
yeah. Oh, it's
example. Yeah.
behind me. I don't know if you could see the. It's. I don't know if you could
Okay.
see it.
Possibly like do the editings that I can make
This
your full. There we go.
is that
Community
your.
First Advantage. Is that available on Amazon or any other publisher that we can order online?
Absolutely. Yeah, you can get it online at Amazon, and you can get
As
the print, ebook, or audiobook.
okay, it's does it ship to anywhere in the world, right?
It does. Yeah, worldwide.
Okay, cool. That's cool. I definitely I'm going to get my example. I must read it. Very exciting. And walk us through like the core idea behind the community first advantage. What's the one insight that it's in the book that you consistently get from leaders, and the feedback that makes them to think and reflect more, that possibly they've been getting things wrong. And have you got this kind of feedback of readers, any leader that read your book?
Yeah. I've been getting a lot of feedback. Very, very insightful of seeing where leaders are really resonating with it, and they're resonating with the idea that there's the opportunity, with trust and knowing the long term and investment. The community, you can't microwave it. It's a fine meal. Like, that's really resonating with that, because it's similar to relationships, right? And I think at the end of the day, leaders want to build. They want to build relationships, and you build your business on those relationships. So community is that connective tissue to do that. So they're resonating with that concept, and they're also resonating with the adapt model that's in there, that mindset model that is used to guide and kind of put a framework around the mindset of a community first leader, so you kind of understand what that means and how to build towards that. And then the idea of the fixed versus growth, like that's been really resonating as well, and understanding, like, there are leaders. This isn't like no other companies have gone out there and done this, right? There's some really exciting leaders in the book that I talk about that have stayed the course and really show that community first leadership gives them an advantage. So the idea of what I'm saying in the book, and that comes through in any time I work with leaders, is that if you're intentional about building community and having it be something that drives you as a leader, both in your mindset and in your business strategy, you know, you are just in that simple part, even if you haven't really implemented any community, that you are at an advantage, because you're better positioned to understand, to be agile, to be more emotionally intelligent and in touch, with that. Now, when you take that mindset and embed it into business strategy, and you say, hey, we're going to intentionally launch communities and embed communities in the customer experience so that we can build trust with our customers by listening to them and taking action, and actually building an environment where we bring our customers together, right? And talk and help them grow in whatever we're doing, or build a community internally so we have our staff feels more connected, to each other. Because if you're hybrid, man, you need a community
Mhm.
in order to do that. You got staff over here in one office, staff at home. Like, I don't know how you run a business without a community, if you're in that sense, right? So if you have the mindset and you have an operating system, this new community-led, community-driven operating system, you are far better positioned to, adapt to the market, because the market's shifting. Look what happened to AI. Can you imagine community-led companies today, or companies that don't have some type of community in their experience? They can't get feedback from customers. They might, but it's not organized. It's not real. It's not authentic, right? So, and you can't get that connection and feedback from your staff, in that way. And then if you get the idea that community-led companies, they have trust infrastructure. They have online networks already in place. They have leaders that are looking across the organization and wanting to get feedback and all these different things. Those companies are a immense advantage, and it shows in the marketplace. And there's this idea too that if you look at companies like Lego or Canva or even Harley Davidson or Sephora, they all have community driven leaders that have either helped them pivot to.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah. There's a story I tell in the book about Lego. It's a different story that many people haven't really necessarily heard, but this idea that back in 2001, or that time period, they were faced with a lot of debt in their organization, and they weren't necessarily listening to the next generation of customers, which was the adult fans of Lego, and they were playing and creating in this online forum, and Lego wasn't necessarily listening to them. But Lego had a couple of change agents and forward thinking employees and forward thinking executive that did listen, and they started to listen, and they went and posted in that same forum, and that began this transformation over about 7 to 10 years of the customers listening. And what we have today, we have Lego is one of the most profitable, you know, toy
True.
companies it's ever been, right? So, but that transformation, they were going to go and stick with what was working, which was the toy companies, as opposed to these fans. So, but that all began in the community. It all began in the mindset of that leader who was like, we're not going to do what we've always done. We're gonna do something different, maybe a little hard, may put us out there, maybe a little risky, but look what paid off. And you can, the story of Canva is really interesting too, and how they are able to build a network of ambassadors. And
True.
what's fascinating too is that if you take community and embed it into any particular business structure, it becomes a unique strategy that's unique, and that's what makes community exciting, is that however a company is set up, they can choose their own path for community, and that becomes their advantage. because what makes them unique in the marketplace already makes customers want to purchase them, but you enhance that and you really put this like rocket fuel behind your strategy where now you have a better connection with your customers in that way, and you get to execute your own community strategy within that market differentiator. But Figma, a list could go on and on about these companies that at the beginning of their company they embedded community into that, and that's what differentiated them from their competitors. Competitors were just sticking to the course and let's be product led instead of community led. And yeah, I just don't think we see some of the companies that we do today if they weren't community driven, like in that way. I don't think we'd be watching the Lego movie, or we would, be using Canva like in the way that a lot of us do, and some of those, and the list goes on. Sephora, another great example, when they were embedded in community, a lot of companies were pulling out of the brick and mortar, so they embed community beauty inside our community together. So, but that's why I love to focus on what drove those companies, and it's leadership mindset, and it's this idea that we're not going to think like, you know command and control. We're going to use community for a mindset and everything to drive us. And if you need a bottom line, if you need a balance sheet to convince you as a leader, like that's, I don't know what will transform you any more than those companies, right? Those leaders are all in on it. So if you're not all in, like I'd hate to see what your company might look like in 5 years from now. If you're not, because of AI and for all these different things, you can't. Those companies that are community led are far more agile. They have far more
You
trust
mentioned
built with their community, their customers.
you mentioned two things that caught my attention.
Mm,
First, just to cycle back on Canva, actually, I love how they approach the community first, especially on the webinars and events that when they launch. Like you do feel that's very much connected to the business and what's about, and it's a very interesting like positioning that they have. And the other two aspects that I wanted to flag, you talked about the hybrid mode, for example, style, right? Which is a bit more challenging to build community, like working remotely. Which I agree. I see where you're coming from. Uh, but during COVID, how businesses managed to do that, and how did you help them? And then after that, I will make my other question on AI. But I just wanted to come back to this point because or
hmm
else I'm going to forget. And I think that's very much interesting topic to ask, especially there are a lot of businesses now, they are coming back full time in office, or there's some like they're still adjusted with the hybrid mode, like and there's some actually they never came back to the office at all. Like in Brazil, for example, where I'm from, there are a lot of companies, especially in tech. Some CEOs they said that the business run much better as a remote structure than in the office.
hmm
Of course, possibly in his point of view is because of the costs like building,
mm
electricity, and so on. But I just wanted to get the sense, like from your perspective, how was that during COVID, which I think was the most challenged period that we had, and how did you manage with the businesses in general?
Yeah, yeah. No, interesting question. I think it's a complex question, and it's got a lot of layers to it. But one
Sure.
of the aspects that I like to point out when I get asked that question is that there's like a post COVID. I'm sorry, or, pre COVID and post COVID, and even before the pandemic happened, the loneliness epidemic, right? There's disconnect, right? That we still had command and control, and it was still difficult to convince leaders, to launch communities for their staff, in that coming to COVID, in that environment when that happened, it was kind of an interesting shift because leaders had no choice, but to embrace online because you couldn't get, couldn't come in person. So what happened was that there was a lot of leaders that I working with that it turned the light bulb on for them, and they're like, wow, okay, cool. Like this could actually be a business advantage in that way. And they really enjoyed the aspect of being able to have an asynchronous experience, and be able to use networks. And even though we couldn't get together in person, there's still a way to connect. And it also opened the door for this bigger conversation about how knowledge flows across an organization. And it helped a lot of companies kind of get into the present, actually, because there's a lot of companies that still have a lot of their knowledge kind of locked up either in systems or in people. So when you have a community based ecosystem within your company, your departments are no longer siloed, and you begin to take value in, new staff coming in. They feel more connected when they join the company, and staff who are more feel more connected, they're more likely to stay, in that way. So those COVID forced a lot of leaders, to have that light bulb turned on, to go, wow, okay, this is important. And it kind of proved what we've already known for many years, is that community is an important piece of the employee and customer experience. And it kind of helped them to see, like, okay, there's value in this. We do need to invest in the infrastructure, meaning the technology, but also the trust infrastructure across that. So you just saw a lot of leaders, they go, okay, this is a priority. And they saw the ability to communicate, and some leaders, had a experience where they went back. Or, well, we're going to get into that, I guess, in your first part of your next part of your question. But I think it opened up, and a lot of leaders were able to see what they were missing in that sense. So it was a
Cool.
yeah, it's exciting time. And I had just started to write my book, um, or think about writing it, like, as we were going through COVID, because I've seen over the last 20 years, I've seen different things kind of come and go in trends, and
Okay.
community has always been there. You had the internet, obviously, you had social, then you had mobile, then you had big data, then you have other things. And the funny thing that I always say is that, in trying to help leaders see the opportunity with community, I go, man, if I would have thought a pandemic would have helped leaders do that, man, why didn't I think of that before? I say that, not to joke around about what happened during the pandemic, but often crisis teaches, right? Crisis forces leaders and forces us to see value in things that we never would have really seen them otherwise. And thankfully, those leaders that I work with, they haven't gone back, because once you get a taste of the community and the trust and the ability to talk right to your customers and to communicate and build relationship with your staff in a unique way, most leaders don't go back to it. They don't go back to the old way. They see the value. They see, the bottom line impact, or at least they see the business value in it. They may not see the ROI right away, but they know that this is the right thing to do because how it feels. And you can not only feel it, but the other thing is interesting, is that we actually have science now to back this up. So, like, real neuroscience, it shows companies like Zappos and companies, Ernst and Young, like, they've all done research with this doctor that I featured in my book, called Dr. Paul Zak. Done some really interesting research on the molecular connection between trust and neuroscience. And I had him in the book because I wanted to connect what his work was doing with neuroscience with community. Because I had an idea, and we show this in the book, about being able to really show that when you build community, you're actually making people feel connected at a molecular level, like inside their body. And, like, why wouldn't you want to take advantage of that same thing, that when we go to a concert, or when we watch our favorite movie, or we listen to our favorite music, like that, those things make us more engaged. They make us more likely to trust the people. And they call oxytocin, the trust molecule, because when
Okay.
it rises, like, we trust each other. So when you and I are looking at our eyes, or if you post something in the community and I answer it for you, your oxytocin levels go up. So why
Interesting.
wouldn't you want to have an environment in your customer experience that makes your customers feel more connected to each other and to your brand? And why wouldn't you want to do the same thing in your in your employee experience. So super powerful stuff, right? I mean, we're talking science, we're talking research, opportunity. Like people are hungry for these things right now with the society, the world needs it, the business market needs it. So it's it's certainly exciting times to build community and for leaders to launch these. I think when your customers or your staff feel says, "Hey, we're going to launch a community," I think they're going to get excited about that because they're like it's something that they're feeling, right? And they want authenticity.
That's cool. You've been talking a lot about authenticity, and I totally agree with you, especially now where we live in a era of AI and everything's changing, right? And talking about AI, that would be my second part of the question. It's changing everything, how organizations operate, how decisions get made, how teams communicate, everything. The services and products as well, like they've been changing. Some leaders see it as a threat to human connection. Others see this as an enabler, right? Like as a potential tool. Where do you stand in a world where AI can do more and more? And what becomes the irreplaceable role of a truly human leader?
Yeah. I've been sitting with this for the last couple years, and I had a little bit about this in the end of the book because I was finishing up when AI was really taking off. So the way I think about it now is that I'm excited about AI, but I'm also optimistic. Like I'm cautious about it because I've seen both firsthand and I've seen it at scale with communities, and I think we're in a very interesting time where there's a lot of layers to community and AI, and community and AI will be forever linked and intertwined. And what I mean by that is that when you look at the LLMs, right, and the ability for LLMs to work, they're reading communities. They're being trained on community data. They're being trained on what actually is said in that about a brand, and so that's the first truth, right? And then the other piece is that inside an actual community, there is lots of opportunity to make that community experience more valuable to customers, meaning you can use AI to improve search, to improve onboarding, to improve the connection between customers and allow customers to ask better questions so they get better answers, to their and and then the other piece is that I've been working with companies to extract intelligence from their community and use AI to understand patterns, trends on products and things like that. So I get excited about that because for the last 20 years since I've been doing this, it's been really hard to get the data out of the community into the business. We've been able to figure out how to do it, but AI, now the tools I think have caught up to some of the things that have been in my head about like how do we get the customer intelligence, which is all the conversations, all the things going on in the community. How do you get that out into the product teams, into the sales teams, customer experience team, marketing teams, brand, all these different things, right? How do you do that? I think AI, and I've already seen that. I've already been working on different projects where we're extracting intelligence from the community, creating agents, getting into agentic with communities. So I think it has to be leaders have to be intentional about how they're using the tool. Because if you think about the flip side of that, we should not have a bunch of bots running around our communities. People want to be more efficient, but they still want to be human. And they still want to be connected like you and I are right now. Or this is live, right? The two humans talking to each other. This isn't Maltbot, that weird AI community. I don't know if you heard about that, but this community was created with just a bunch of agents and bots talking to each other. Super
Okay.
wild and crazy. So that's not us right now. This is real. Customers, staff, employees, they want real, and we can use AI to connect people to each other in that sense. But it has to be intentional. So I would say I'm in the middle, and I've been experimenting a lot with different tools, from everything, Claude to Gemini to ChatGPT and all the other agentic stuff, and I'm personally excited about it. But the way I've been advising leaders, is to think about it in, AI is going to essentially accelerate and be an engine for the conversations that you're already having or maybe not having. So leaders should be thinking about how are you going to build that trust infrastructure, which is your community, right? Which is the conversations and the people that are already there. Because AI is just going to read it and it's going to throw it out there,
Yeah.
and you're going to want to set up the right way. Like, is your trust infrastructure organized? Is it categorized? Is it in a way that you want to your brand to show up? Is it in a way that you want people to find your information? Because most communities are not organized. They're not structured properly for LLMs. They're not structured for RAG. They're not structured for these things. So it's important to like stop and look at that, but then also you don't want to develop your company in a way too fast where you got all these AI projects going on and your community is not part of those conversations. Like you should be building your community into your product tools, AI tools across your company. So making sure that your staff, and your departments are talking to each other in that sense. So these are the things I'm thinking about, as far as community and AI. It's like some people are anti AI. Some people are AI first, and I'm more like, let's use the tool in the right way, but let's be cautious and thoughtful and mindful and intentional about how we still maintain that authenticity, because it's we still want that, we still need that today. But let's not use AI. Let's use it in the right way.
I agree with you. I see that as a unavoidable tool nowadays.
Yeah.
You do have to use it. Some people a lot, some people less, depending on your role in your industry. And I feel one thing that AI won't take over is the, as you said, the authenticity and the community. Because by the end of the day, like, we're humans, right? And one thing that I noticed working with my clients, for example, it's funny because I say that to them all the time. They insist to trust so badly on AI and less in their own instincts. And I tell them, don't forget we're selling to humans, right? Won't be ChatGPT who is going to buy from you. You'll be like
Yeah.
Mary, you'll be John, you'll be Paul, you'll be people, you'll be humans. It won't be Gemini or whatever. So
Mhm.
make sure when you are speaking, when you're writing your copy or making any advertisement out there, this is actually talking to your consumer. You can use the tool like the AI tools to help you to build the framework or to build the structure, right? The skeleton, and put out together whatever you have as your draft. But don't forget that the final line is it's you. It's you selling to humans and humans buying from you. And unfortunately, I can't tell how many brands and how many businesses that I've seen. They just trust, like, copy and paste the structure of AI, and they put out there, and it's actually quite upsetting. I'm afraid, as a marketeer, I'm afraid because I'm not afraid to be replaced. I'm afraid of, are we actually now in a new pattern where we have to be robotic and everybody perfect without authenticity, without the slangs, or without the jokes, or the
Mm.
malicious things between the lines, the creativity piece of what's marketing truly is, and I just miss it. I have a collection of books called All American Ads, right, from Tashin, and I was looking back from like early his 50s, etc., how ads were structured and how is now. Sorry, it's just really sad. Like, to me as a marketeer, it's really sad. I miss these days. Like, I mean, I was not alive there, but I miss like how much creativity and how much of out of the box these people were thinking. And this is where I believe AI can't take us. um but things are changing really fast, and it's been interesting. So I liked the piece, and I agree with you when you mentioned about the authenticity part of it.
Yeah, that's the opportunity right there. What you just said, I mean, that's the opportunity that leaders have, to be able to think through how is community can often be a counterbalance to AI. And that's another way to look at it. And how do you balance that in your brand experience, in your customer experience with that? So that's an important question for leaders to ask themselves, when they're looking across the ways they want to use AI across the brand, and specifically in a community, And how do you want to use your community to counterbalance some of the things that might not be as authentic in the rest of the experience? Because you can use AI to automate, but you know, we're still figuring out. I think we're early in the game here of figuring out how all this works together. Because it took a while. I remember people struggling with the fact that they were going to give up their credit card number on the internet. Like that was the thing. People were like, "No, I just want to write a check," and
Okay.
I'm going to put my name and number in here, or I'm going to post this on Facebook, or it was just this progression that we kind of figured out. And there's a dark side and a light side to that. Dark side is like we have to stop and think, okay, if we get too automated, what does it do to us? What does it do to our brains? Because there's a cognitive impact on using AI, offloading too much of our brain, like what you were just saying, the creativity. You expressed that, you just missed it. You're missing that. I think a lot of us are. I watch movies, and I was watching this movie. I watch a lot of movies with my son. We have this phrase when we watch a movie, we go, was that plot development human or AI? We're like, was this script written? Like, I'm like, man, it seems like AI right there. We have a thing, and I can kind of sense it, and that. So it makes sense that you would feel that way. And then the dark side, or the light side, is that I think used in the right way, like we can really help a lot. We can get to information at scale because machines are really good at reading patterns, pattern recognition, and automating some things. So yeah, I just think we're at a crossroads. We're at a time in history where we have technology at our fingertips here, and we're figuring out how to use it. All the levels of you know you know like the guy in Jurassic Park, Malcolm. He goes, just because we can doesn't mean we should. Like I
True.
think that's an important lesson, right? Should we bring dinosaurs back to humans? Should we offload so much creativity? Should we be like the Terminator, a Skynet, kind of thing? Like we should stop and think in that way. But then the struggle is to be able to go, okay, well, how do we use what is core to us as human beings, which is community? Like we are literally designed as human beings to be together. We thrive when we're together. Some of us may be more introverted and extroverted than others. Absolutely, there's a spectrum there. But at our core, I believe that we are designed to be together, and we excel when we're together. So we have to figure out how AI and this technology fits into that human experience. So again, it's this opportunity for leaders to think about, how do they fit this into their business? How do they use it as an advantage, in the marketplace and development, in their own development as a leader? You can't lead your company if you're not like your mindset, right? So yeah, it's interesting times with AI. Be interesting to see what things are going to look like in the next 5 years. I'm not going to sit here and tell you what it's going to look like, but I know I'm on board for figuring it out, and I don't think putting our head in the sand is any way to solve the problem. It's more getting out there and rolling up our sleeves and figuring out what works, what doesn't, and sharing it as fast as possible with each
True.
other, and being honest and authentic, right? And that again, that's why I think we need community. We need community infrastructure in our society, in our businesses, in the marketplace. I think that it's one thing that's going to balance all this stuff out. Like if you think about it, right? Communities keep other parts of our society, parts of the marketplace honest when you think about it too. So again, it's this leaders would need to think about, okay, how do I use community? I already know community is valuable. How am I going to use it in my business? How am I going to use it to offset maybe some of the AI stuff that I'm doing? Or how am I going to embed AI to enhance my community strategy? Because that's an opportunity too.
Well, you mentioned that you've been around more than 20 years already advising founders, executives. I'm sure you've seen a lot inside of organizations. What's the most repeated mistake that you see inside these organizations over and over? by smart or well-intentioned people who genuinely care about their teams?
Yeah, it comes down to there's a few myths, and a few things that people leaders get tripped up on a lot. One of the big ones is like ROI, and it's a complex one because I get it. Like publicly traded companies or companies that got to show progress. We're going to invest over here. We want to see return over there. In that way, like I get that, but leaders will put too much of an emphasis on wanting to see community ROI in an unrealistic amount of time. Sometimes they're like, "Well, the thing has to show ROI in 6 months, or we're going to cut it." And I'm like, "Wow!" Like, so if your child doesn't start walking in, a couple of weeks or a couple of months, are you gonna get rid of your baby? And like, no. I'm like, okay, cool, because that's kind of the same thing that we're that we're working with. So ROI, like, thinking that you know this community thing is going to work out like really quickly, right? So we're thinking, so the opposite of that is like long term thinking. So leaders get tripped up on that. The other part is that they often think of community as social media, and those are the same things, right? They think that if you have a you know X feed or Instagram or whatever it is, like, and you're broadcasting, they mistake broadcasting for community, and there's not a way to do that. So when you have an online brand community, a forum, experience that you own and that you can cultivate and facilitate connections among your customers and go deep with them, that's community. Social media is not, in most cases, like community habits sent. There's examples of that maybe in a group that's being cultivated and protected and grown, but leaders will often think that, okay, yeah, we just gotta, we have an X feed, or we have, something, we're publishing content, we have a community, or we have a newsletter, we have a community. I'm like, no, not quite, but
Or buy
that's,
pizza in the end of the month, like that's the
yeah.
classic.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's a great example there, because they'll think if we just get people to an event, that's
Yep.
it. That's all we did. They think, checking a box, and they're missing out on a great opportunity, because if you have events, and you let your customers, you empower them to drive those, and you're there listening at the event, you should bring that full circle with an online experience, and sometimes companies will just have, an online experience, they won't have in person. So start somewhere, but don't like have one and not the other, in that way. The other thing is that they don't connect their community to other parts of the business. They think community is only for this, and we're going to silo it over here, and we're going to lock it up, or we're only going to use it for support, or we're only going to use it for this way. And they're not thinking like strategically across the entire business, and within the customer experience. So community is kind of like, just for this company, or this part of the company, like in that way. Like that's what, they get, yeah, they get distracted. And then the last thing is that peer pressure. You know, usually in a company, you have a team of leaders, and you have one leader that believes in it, and the other peers are more like, "Oh, this is a waste of time," or "Hey, that's your thing," or "Hey, that's not my initiative. I don't really care about it." As long, so the more leaders you can have on board, the better. And again, you start with one leader who gets it. So if that's the founder, fantastic, even better. It doesn't always happen in that way. So there's like that's they believe that leader is responsible for it. And then what that does is that stops the growth of the community across the company. And you don't have your community first advantage. You only have like a sliver of it. You don't get all the juice out of that. You don't, so that's, you know, but there's a whole, I have a whole chapter actually in the book called myths. So that's, that those are interesting to unpack. Um,
Very
but
good.
but the good thing is that there's enough companies out there now who are community first. There's more than enough leaders who kind of show like this is how it works, this is how it does. So other leaders who are listening to this, like they can go out and look at all the other companies that are doing this, and they can go, okay, that's, we could do that in a similar way. We could figure this out. We don't have to silo it. We don't have to expect ROI in 6 months, or we're going to shut it down. There's a better way. There's a lot of good examples of what to do.
Nice. Well, people don't forget to get his book. I'm sure I will leave, by the way, the links are on the description for your book, and also the link to connect with Chris, just in case if someone is interested to get in touch with him directly. Chris, you mentioned as well about the gap between leadership values and leadership behavior, right? You talk about leadership being lived, like experienced and skin in the game, not just spoken. In your experience, what causes the gap between what a leader says they value and how they actually behave under pressure? And how do you close this gap in a way that actually sticks like it and fix the problem?
Yeah, yeah, it's another great question. I think it comes to belief. It comes to, is that belief in community really something personal to them? So I had this hypothesis when I was writing the book, you know, is that necessary? Because I've worked with a lot of leaders who believed in it, and I started to look at patterns. I looked at trends among those leaders. The leaders who believed in it and saw it long term and went past the 6 months ROI, and they were like, yeah, this is important. They got pressure, they dealt with the pressure, they moved on, and they both developed as a leader, and their communities that they launched, they sustained. So I was looking at all of them and what was the main, like, what made them unique, in that sense. And it came down to belief. They all had a personal experience, whether at a concert, in a rowing club, whether some leaders actually, they had family members die and their community came around them and they were like, wow, like I need to be like this in my leadership. So they had some kind of like personal experience. So that was a hypothesis that came to be true for me. So that's why I created the adapt model, like in the book, and as a way that I guide leaders to go, okay, first let's talk about your mind, and your belief, and then the mindset, and then the strategy, and then the operating system comes later, with that. Because every situation I've worked with, the leaders who crumble on that pressure or deviate or cut the program, they didn't really believe. They didn't really have like a personal, like, they weren't willing to go to battle for that. Because when you go to war, right, or when you're going to fight for something, what do people usually say when they're going to fight for something? They what, right? I believe in
Yeah,
this, right? Like, I
they
believe in this. I'm gonna fight for it. I believe it. I'm gonna fight for it. That's the phrase that people
sure.
say, right? So that's the essence. Like, they know that it's not only the right thing to do, but it's the necessary thing to do. Community, meaning like they're gonna build this regardless of that. And I've seen leaders do that. I've seen them be really courageous and almost in a lot of cases, almost win their peers over because of they're courageous. They go, oh yeah, and over time, their colleagues in sales and their colleagues, in finance or whatever, are like, okay, over time, wow, this community thing actually works, and because that leader is watching that other community led leader, they're operating differently. They're working from a different mindset, which shows up in how they lead and how their departments and how they lead their company in that way. So that it's belief, like, it's hands down. It's that. And I just see community as this new way of leading, right? You had servant leadership that's been around for a long while, but community first leadership is, I believe, the new evolution of servant leadership, because you can use technology, you can use digital, you can connect ecosystems, because that's what community first leadership is. It's thinking like not just silos and top down or even just teams. It's thinking ecosystems. It's thinking ecosystems of ecosystems, and you're thinking networks. Like, how can I connect networks and not just, you know, small group of people who have all the control necessarily. You're a stronger company and you're a stronger brand if you have networks, you have connected networks. So that's what community first leadership is. It's thinking ecosystems. It's thinking, okay, we're in the age of AI. We're in the age of loneliness epidemic. What's the best way? What's the best scenario that's going to benefit and serve customers and staff? Connect us, right? Do the things that people don't want to do for themselves, but create that environment that when they do that, they're like, wow, I'm really glad that they had that experience, right? So that's the that's kind of the idea, and that's why it's exciting. Like leaders who get it, they're like, yeah, I want to be community first leader because they get the ecosystem concept. They get like we're going to connect people. We're not going to divide them. We're going to connect them, and it's the right, and it's going to be good for the business. Like that's the other part. It's not just warm and fuzzy. It's like we can, I love showing leaders how if they believe in this, it's not just like something that is going to be like good for them feeling good, but it
True.
actually shows up on the balance sheet. And it shows that when you build this for your customers, I've seen like you could see the impact of it on retention rates, on churn, on cost savings. So that's the other exciting part is that we have tools now, we have models and frameworks to show that community drives business value. We kind of come full circle there, but that's the that's the exciting part. Is that companies who decide to go on this journey, like I don't know if they realize what they're in for, but it is quite it's quite transformational, like in that sense. And that's exciting to see a leader go like from a skeptic to a believer to a champion, or somebody who's on like on the fence kind of, and they're like, oh wow, we can, this is the right thing to do, and we can measure it, and it's going to change the company and the market and the world. Wow, why didn't I do this sooner? Like in that sense. So it's rewarding to guide companies and leaders in like that process through doing workshop, or doing coaching with them, or strategy sessions, things like that. So that's why I love doing this work. It's fun to see that impact.
Nice.
Rewarding, not just fun, rewarding.
Well, you dedicated your career reshaping how leadership works, right? We already talked about AI that's accelerating everything, and human connection is becoming like simultaneously more scarce because as more technology we have, I understand that less connected we stay and more valuable. What I believe that makes that more valuable, the true authenticity and the true connection, as you mentioned. But how do you look at this in the next 5 years, like for the future, and where most organizations, like mostly, let's say, just see they prepared for it? They just see also the traditional model of businesses, like organizations, they prepared for it. How do you see that in the next 5 years? Everything changing now with AI and more technology advance.
Yeah, I think a lot about that, obviously, but I think there's going to be, from what I see companies doing now, like some are moving too fast because they have to. They don't always need to, but I understand the pressure to do that. So I think in that case, there might be some like, wow, we moved too fast. We separated ourselves too much from our customer, from our staff, or we weren't authentic in that way. And I think some companies might look back and go, oops, we were too AI first in that way. I think that's going to be reality. But on the flip side, there are community driven companies that are being thoughtful and mindful about how they're embedding community into their into their communities, existing communities, and into their business, right? And those companies also have like, they have that advantage because they have that community with their, or they have that connection with their customers. So they're asking their customers about AI, and do you like this, do you not, as opposed to just like creating something and launching it. Community first companies, they pause, they listen, they learn, take feedback, then they go. And in that process, like that's where they build the trust. And I think we're looking at a situation potentially where there's a bigger rift between AI first companies, inauthentic companies who are way too invested in AI, across the entire business. And then there's companies who are, innovative with their community strategy, and they're figured out how to blend it together. Um, I mean that's kind of one scenario, but that's why I've been thinking about community and AI in this layered framework. It's this 8-layer framework that I've been talking about and exploring, in a way that first you position it, and you have foundation, you have thinking about community across the customer experience. How are you going to integrate? How are you going to use it to grow what you already have? And how are you going to govern and protect the trust? Of that. So it's kind of this like these different layers, and there's different ways of looking at community and AI, in a thoughtful, mindful way because it is complex. And so I think there are companies in the next few years that are going to be looking back and going, "Oh man, we shouldn't have moved that fast," like in that way. But the companies that do, I think that's again they have an advantage. I mean that's the thing. But I don't know. I think that communities or companies in AI, they're gonna figure out. Uh, just like we learned a lot about social media. We learned about how good and bad that was for us and businesses, and you're seeing a lot of companies too like move away from using social media to connect with their customers. We're seeing a lot of brands wanting to own their own communities and create that experience that they can own and go deep. Because if you build your community on social media, you're subject to the algorithm. You're subject to all these other factors, advertising or UI experience, all these different things, and the data. You don't get a lot of the data that you need of those conversations to take action on, with that. So what I'm seeing is a lot of brands wanting to create their own community off of social media in that sense. So it's kind of going back to social media, but I see a lot of that AI stuff. Like I think people they want a balance. They want the human in the loop. They want to be efficient, but they don't want to be too inauthentic in that way. So it's up to the companies to think through what does that experience look like? Be thoughtful. Don't just race to create a tool just because it's flashy and cool or to be first. Think about your customers. Think about their relationship. Is that AI tool going to enhance that relationship, or is it going to, you know, put it at risk in that sense? I think that comes down to that, and that's what a community first leader does. They think about the trust. They think about the relationship first, and it's not just about an online experience. It's about the mindset of the relationship and the relationship that leaders have to themselves and the relationship that leaders have to their customers and to their staff. And community-led leaders, hands down, no doubt, community-led leaders are thinking differently about AI than non-community-led leaders. And I can already see some of that happening already in the marketplace. I can look at a company and go, I don't know if they have community-led leaders, they're thinking through their AI strategy, like in that way. But
I,
But hopefully we have enough people out there that are thinking community first to help their leaders think through, all these all these challenges. Because at the end of the day, like, what do you if you don't have trust, like, you don't have a business, and AI doesn't create trust. Like, maybe there's a couple scenarios where that's true, but at the end of the day, AI will only accelerate what is already there. And if you don't have community, if you don't have a relationship built through trust, you don't have that infrastructure built in your company, like AI is going to show that, and it's going to accelerate maybe something that you don't want to have happening, out there.
I, I thought I would never say that. As we speak right now, human connection will be a great product in the future.
Well, yeah. Well, people are already paying for connection. Like that's already happening. Like they're already, they're wanting to give their money to connect with other human beings. And granted, there's been other ways of that across history, but people are paying to have friends.
I don't know if
Like they're
that's funny
lonely.
or sad. Sorry.
So it is a business. Yeah, strange. That's another topic for another podcast, but I feel like we could go on that. But yes, yeah, I see where you're going. I agree. Yeah.
Well, okay, that's actually blew my mind now. Look, Chris, was it's a lot of to take on after this whole conversation. It's very interesting insights that you shared with us. I love the input that you made about authenticity. I totally agree with you. I'm down with you that in my industry I see authenticity is dying, and I'm struggling myself. Look, as a marketeer, I'm struggling myself in a limbo. Like, should I be myself or should I be more robotic that's going to sell? Should I change my pattern? Look, because I believe, as you said, human connection is still a thing. That's why I'm here with the podcast. I only came back with the podcast recently because of that, because I still believe there are a lot of amazing people out there, a lot of professionals and business founders and leaders with great stories, great insights. and there's no AI that can take over it, right? Because you own that story, you own that experience. All AI can own is like the data, but it's not the same. And you mentioned the one thing that's key, the trust, right? Like humans trust humans, and that's why we're here together recording this episode. And all I have to say is thank you. And but before let you go, traditionally we play a ping pong with our guests, so quickly and short answers. You can't think, it's just like snip questions and snip answers. So let's go. Your favorite sport?
Favorite sport?
Yeah, favorite sport.
Baseball, hiking, and
Oh, okay, you into MMA. It's a big thing in Brazil, by the way. Like
I
people
know.
love crazy, I did 1 month, Chris, of MMA and never more. Like that was a punching bag, and I said, "Look, this is not for me." But baseball. There's a Brazilian guy recently. He got signed with Red Rocks. I don't know. It's a big franchise, I think. And he moved like from Brazil to the US because
Oh, the
he got signed.
Rockies,
Yes, I'm
Colorado
not sure.
Rockies, maybe.
I heard that's considered the best team, but again,
The
I
Red
don't know.
Sox, maybe the Red Sox.
Yeah, I know that is a big team, and they say that's the best. But I was
Well,
impressed.
I'm from Chicago. The Cubs are the best. Just to correct everybody on that. But sorry to
Very
you
good,
Boston fans. But it's all good.
Chris. Your favorite song could be right now if you struggle.
Our favorite song, I would say it is. I was just listening to. It is. I don't know what's popping in my head right now.
No judgments, no judgment, Chris. Nobody,
Well,
nobody will judge you.
I particularly love the Rolling Stones song, "She's a Rainbow." I think that's a really cool song.
Nice.
But yeah, I think anything by a band called Wilco or anything, in that brand. I'm a huge hip hop fan too, so fan of Kanye West and
Oh,
just
all
getting
right.
into all the different songs that are out there. But yeah, no, it's a tough question. I always get there's so many different ways you could answer that.
Depending on the day, I have different favorite songs. By the way. Now to wrap up.
Oh, the Strokes. I should say the Strokes, Reptilia, or anything
Okay,
by the Strokes. I think I enjoy.
I like these guys.
Or the band the Viagra Boys. I don't know if anybody's listening to that, but they have a lot of good music out there. And Emerald and the Snifters too, punk band. You should check them out. So
Cool.
good. I'll
Noted.
stop there.
I forgot that you play instruments, so you must be very much into music
I love
yourself.
music. Yeah, I don't play any instruments, but I
Don't
love.
okay.
I'm a music journalist. I play and
Oh, there we go.
or
Sorry.
I write about. I used to write about music, so still a fan.
Okay, there we go.
Always in there.
To wrap up, the last question would be: recommend us a movie.
A movie, yeah. Hell, I watch a lot of movies with my son and kids and family. So I would say, man, Inglorious Bastards, Pulp Fiction. I'm a huge Quentin Tarantino fan. I think he's one of the best filmmakers ever.
Nice.
Good Will Hunting is amazing film. I could watch over and over again. I watched a movie that was really interesting called The Substance.
Yeah.
Su-
I watched that movie.
Did you like it? Yeah.
It disappointed me in the end, man. Like,
Oh, the end.
I l-
I thought the end was really good because it was
look,
like,
it got my attention, right? I was so into it. Like, I was so into it. I loved the storytelling. I loved it. But the last 20 minutes, right? And you must know it. I won't to give any spoiler,
yeah.
but
Don't give it
the last
away.
20
Yeah,
minutes,
right. The spoiler.
you must know the last 20 minutes I've been talking about. I think that guy was like, I don't know, like what
Yeah, it's a
happened,
certain genre. It's a genre of film. Yeah,
right?
grotesque. Yeah,
And
grotesque
I
horror.
just
Yeah,
I got disappointed in the end. Like I said, seriously, like but the whole story,
yeah.
and
Without
again,
ruining the end for the listeners, I have some thoughts. Maybe we could chat offline about that. But what he was shouting at the end, "It's me, it's me, it's me." Like I thought that was
yeah,
perfect. Like just the the obsession of beauty and youth in our culture. Right. I thought it was like well done. Like really in your face, get your attention. This is nasty, gross. Like, but
true.
Demi Moore fantastic acting job. Like just yeah.
Yeah,
So,
no.
but we I
I
enjoyed
must
that one.
say, it was a an amazing movie. It's just personally like the last 20 minutes, I got like
Maybe
I
watch it
don't
again. Maybe see it.
I'll
Or
give
I
it a
don't know.
chance.
You kind of have to watch that movie. Give yourself a break because it's it's good. But really, really, yeah, really, really well done.
Well, thank you so much once again for your participation. This is it for today on our episode. Guys, please connect with Chris. Also, check it out his book. The link's available in the description. Community First Advantage. I'm going to purchase the book myself because I'm actually very much interested now to see what's in there. I firmly believe as well that will be like an amazing tool for my career moving forward, especially because as I want to start my own businesses and projects, it'll be important to understand how I can build a community, not only with my clients, but with the team, and I'm learning from the best that I could. So thanks so much, Chris.
You're welcome. Yeah. No, thank you, Alex. Fantastic conversation. I appreciate being here.